on May 4th, 2020. Call roll.
Mr. Whitehall,
Here.
Mr. Thies,
Here.
Dr. Pandolfi,
Here.
Mr. Cook,
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. We have a forum.
Okay. All right. You have an agenda in front of you. It's short. The only thing we're going to do is flip number 5 and number 6 so that Andy doesn't have to sit through the budget discussion. So unless there are other changes, or, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda. Second.
Second.
And Teresa, just easier for you to call the roll, call the vote.
Okay, Ms. Whitehall,
Aye.
Mr. Thies,
Yes.
Dr. Pandolfi,
Aye.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Um,
Okay. All right. You had they were up. I don't have any changes. Does anybody, if no one has changes or corrections? And I would like to take a motion to approve those. So moved. For a second?
Second.
Bob seconded.
Okay.
Teresa?
Ms. Whitehall,
Aye.
Mr. Thies,
Yes.
Dr. Pandolfi,
Aye.
Mr. Cook,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Thank you. These motions.
Okay. All right, board docs, Andy, why don't you pull up a chair? Easier. We have the document that was prepared by CFO Systems. No, that's not. Seems. Set the table, you're all aware, we asked CFO Systems to scope out the review that would be done as an independent party with construction expertise. And the document they presented is a draft, results of that. It does include some language that I'll call the boilerplate. I don't want to focus on that today. We will we'll let library staff, Aaron and staff, take care of that and getting into the standard format of the library. So I'd like to focus on what is section 3 and some of the sections following that. So how do you want to proceed with this?
That's a great question. First, appreciate
We haven't discussed that.
appreciate the time and the opportunity to work with the library. We have reviewed.
Chair,
Yes.
it's probably formally just been recorded, everything. He introduced himself.
Andy Erbeling, expansion ops leader for CFO Systems here in Kansas City. We've had the opportunity to go through some of the documentation and discussions with Aaron and Quan and Gordon, reviewing the contracts, the major contracts. With J.E. Dunn, SDA and Helix, looked at some of the other additional documentation that was provided from the library and walked through what we believe is an appropriate agreed upon procedures to understand the scope of Prop where invoices, changes, expenditures were laid and intended and agreed upon, and to understand any differences, variances, and communications that happen between the board, the contractors, and the construction management team at the library. So we go through several steps in this, in which
You want a paper copy?
I have it on my phone. We go through several steps to better understand the contract. We reviewed the contract, but not in the detail in which it would require agreed upon procedures. That was part of the scope of our practice, is to understand the outline, what the capital plan was, the initial budget, where the variances had happened from the initial budget, taking some of those pieces and providing our construction expertise to say, under a construction management at risk project, how would this information be presented to the board and the finance committee to better understand where overages happened, why they happened, and where they were communicated along the time. So,
Can I interject? Because one of the things that's in here is evaluating if things were presented to the board. I think we found out in the last 30, 45 days that in fact didn't always happen.
correct.
So I don't know that has to be part of the, that's something we can talk about, but I'll let you proceed.
Sure. In doing so, highlighting some of those opportunities for improvement and looking at the contractors and the information that was coming from the construction teams to the library. That's where we wanted to focus on what was the contractors and the people providing the services and what were their scopes and outlines of cash flow projections, and when at what point did they say, hey, here is our budget and here is where our actual spend is going to be. And then using that value engineering analysis to say, okay, what parts of this work were approved above and beyond the budget, and managing the contingency risk or the contingency that was laid out in most of the contracts and bids, but then also looking to say, okay, if there was a scope or something that was above the budget, knowing that all during this timeline, you had some pretty interesting factors with COVID and inflation and construction, and understanding where those pieces were communicated to the contractors to say, hey, we want this for the library. They say, great, it costs this. And the analysis that goes through to say, well, we said we wanted this, but we realize it's going to cost 6 to 8% higher or over budget. Where can we rationalize? Where can we provide some relief in the attempt to stay within our budget? And so that's the pieces in the communication where looking at both the downward stream communication from construction management library team to the contractors, and then up from the construction management team to the board finance committee on where those parts could have been more timely communicated. Yes.
When you use the word budget, are we referring to the GMP or the total project cost for each?
So we look at it in two pieces. We look at the total project costs, but highlighted some of the factors in the projects, individual projects that were significantly over budget. We call those out specifically to say, in any project that was over 10% of budget, you would like to see a deeper dive into those projects, knowing that there are several instances where there's savings or under budgets, paying less focus and attention to those, but still in the grand scheme of looking at the totality of the budget, because there's obviously some savings in one project that potentially were rationalized and used towards other projects. And so it's dual approach from that standpoint, mainly focused on how we got from our original budget to the new budget to the new capital outlay that's okay.
Sure. One more question. Go ahead. Just in your experience, how are contingencies handled on the construction side versus the owner side? And do they typically exist on the owner side alongside the construction side?
Yes. So contingencies in that management at risk approach versus a hard bid approach, where you can take, those are really two separate ways of bidding a project, where you can say, here's what I want. You'll get a contract or a bid for that, and it will lay out, hey, there's some unknown factors and assumptions that we might have, that instead of going and having a change in scope or a price escalation, we're going to anticipate some of those things happening so it can keep the project on time. Where that construction management at risk approach has those in what we utilized or what I've already utilized, there's some flexibilities within those contingencies. And that's really the piece that needs to be managed by the construction team or the PM team to say, okay, these are approved. We asked for this. That ends up eating into our contingency. How much more contingency do we need to have in this project? So it puts the onus and the responsibility more on the PM team to manage that, where if they ask for a certain type of or style or what the contractor is going to do, the contractor is going to do that.
Right.
And they don't have to rebid or ask for a scope or ask for approval because that contingency piece is part of the initial contract.
Okay. Thanks.
So let me, if I can get an illustration, since you raised this question, because it's one that you and I've talked about sort of casually, but and I'll just pick the one we have that is not done. Riverside has had what the board approved is about 6.9 million. Okay. In that 6.9 is just short of 600,000 of a contingency. Okay. So in my experience, that means I have 6.3 that the contractor said they would build it for, because they've gone out to bid, they've got the specs. So if they build it to the spec and there are no surprises or no changes, okay, I should say no changes, then we can build it for 6.3. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the 600 stays in our pocket.
That is the key terminology that you use there is everything goes as planned. Everything is within the assumptions that they created to build it for 6 point.
Well, but if the architect did the drawings
Sure.
and they build it to the spec without any changes in materials or otherwise, or, then who gets the six? So is the 600 available to the contractor or is the 600 under the control of Aaron?
The 600 should be under the control of the construction management team that is going through and saying for 6.3 million, let me make sure the bid was for 6.9 and that was inclusive of the $600,000 contingency.
Yes.
Yes.
Contingency is roughly 8.5%.
Right. So what in that model, it would be my understanding in our approach that if everything went perfectly, the building would be done for 6.3 million and you guys would have a $600 or some $1,000 savings. Now in construction during this time frame, in most projects, there's a delay, a surprise, a change, a price escalation that would eat into that contingency.
But again, that's a contractual issue, is it not? If the contractor said we will build it for X, and that's the maximum they will charge, is
The 6.9.
no, the 6.3. So I guess my concern is we just gave the contractor 600,000 to play with. Because if they fail to do something on a timely basis, fail to order the materials, somebody didn't hit the order button on time, whatever whatever, okay?
Yeah.
That's not our fault.
I completely agree.
To me, it sounds like contract wording. It's a contract wording issue. But anyway,
It's very typical.
we're getting into weeds.
Yeah, it's very typical for that contingency to be a portion of anyone's bid that says, I believe I know all of the assumptions, the specs, and the scope. If something changes and a carpet tile turns from red to blue and it changes the cost of that carpet tile, am I going to wait for an approval to go spend that money if it's $1 extra? Those are the types of things that the construction management team says, hey, contractor, we want these carpet tiles to be red versus blue. Contractor says, great, they're going to cost $1 extra. And the construction management team gives the yes, go ahead or no don't go ahead. That's part of that value analysis or value engineering analysis.
Project team is
The project team is the internal library team.
library team.
Right.
Okay.
And so with that contract language, there's the power of making that $600,000 swing.
Agreed. So, so to answer, if I can answer my own question, is so the control is with the library.
Should be.
Thanks. All right. That's what I wanted to say. That makes sense. One.
Yeah, so really the scope of the project, it outlines that. How was it communicated? Where were the inferences of who made the decisions to provide this? What information and feedback were you getting from the contractor? And how did we create the spread of $19 million? And so we laid out steps and procedures that have some information that is required from the library. So you can see that in the highlighted yellows for scoping, understanding what change orders were there. It goes through in the documentation that we were provided. There's not a lot of change orders. And so that is reasonable to expect within the contingency pieces, but that gets into, okay, how are we managing the contingency? And so that's what our procedures and scope. We're really trying to understand in the communication back between the contractor and the construction management team at the library.
I have a question.
Yep.
On the bottom of page 2. You know, in your second bullet, sub-bullet, you're saying on a sample basis, look into bids for work valued at less than 3,000 if the library is allowed to take best bid and not necessarily the lowest bid. How did you establish the materiality?
That was actually in your guys' Prop L request for proposal. Clearly laid out in saying bids underneath 3,000. That's information straight from
So the standard, Quan?
Yes,
Is that a library standard or statutory?
policy, there was a library policy about that.
32.
I don't remember the number, but
Right.
I believe it seems.
Let me, I have something on that. You're talking about $3,000 or the best versus lowest? Best versus lowest is state statute.
I think Juan is referring to the board policy.
I'd like to know if we're referencing something under 3,000 or the overall, the best bid versus lowest bid. I think many people think lowest bid is what should prevail, but that's not
correct.
required.
Correct. And so what we are laying out here is bids underneath $3,000. If you guys aren't looking at them, these agreed upon procedures probably shouldn't really get into that. Where the best versus lowest in those analyses above 3,000 is something that we would want to take a look at.
I guess if there are very few change orders, and I know one of the documents that Teresa in the package you gave me had, I think there was just one PDF with a bunch of change orders.
Mhm.
And I didn't fly spec it or read pages, but it looked like less than 20. Is that the aggregate of all of them?
That's
Or is it possible that there were changes that are not documented?
what these procedures would help to understand. From this standpoint in the request was understand where the documentation is, and what we have available to us, and write agreed upon procedures to talk through those and understand if there were additional change orders that weren't documented.
All right.
Question.
Go ahead.
I assume there were contracts that were, and buildings were being built in the late teens.
Mhm.
And we talked about 10% or roughly 8.5% was on contingencies. How were tariff increases? Like this kind of sounds like it's a city where I was before this, we were hit by steel tariff costs. So how was it handled in the library then when major costs, because it's nothing that anybody was doing locally, but steel and or Canadian lumber. That contingency was, how was that covered, that increased cost covered?
Yeah, so the scope of our work was to help understand that, not what the inner workings of price escalations and how they were communicated to the team. Our scope of work was to build a RFP that would outline and say, we need to look into that and understand those price escalations. Today, I couldn't tell you what, obviously in the late early 20s,
Right.
there was price escalations that were not locally impacted. They were like you were discussing. And so those things would definitely need to be articulated and
But if we had a guaranteed maximum price, whatever that means.
Yeah, I wondered how that.
and that would be how we would
Eat the cost, don't they?
there would be looking at the contract and understanding if there's any exemptions for that guaranteed maximum price and reviewing those invoices against that will be part of the procedures.
Okay. So, and I'm gonna ask the committee if there's wording in here that pertains to communications to the board, and again, we probably just have to refine that, knowing what we now know. But if I'm hearing you correctly, was the communication from the contractor presented to the library, whether or not it made to the board or not?
Both ways. Yeah, we would want to look at both.
Yeah, and the finance committee was not involved in the building committee issue, but
so maybe we would need to rewrite that then to
Yes.
to get the board and the finance committee.
building.
Yes.
Al, any questions you have? So.
No.
Go ahead.
No, not at this point.
So I put together, after the fact, a one-page schedule that you should have. And we had discussions along the way, starting, I think last summer, but really the first time the board approved a number was in September. And so I put together just a short list that is not intended to be all-inclusive. But with sort of what I'll call the overall goals. I sent you this. I think I sent it to you yesterday. If not. Here. Copy. It's just some broad goals about what I thought, what I think we had discussed. So the detail objectives and I think I just would want to go down and see if we, are we accomplishing these and get some further comments. So number one was compliance with, I got the word and, master and other key contracts, which I think you have covered. Primary contractors, to make sure that the responsibilities were laid out for managing and controlling project costs. So I think you have that one covered. Correct. Does that make sense? Okay. Number two, which we specifically talked about, was that forms, documents, methods, et cetera, used for billings follow industry standard best practices and protocols. Is that fair, Craig? We're going to do that. Okay. Third is number three is what I call the MCPL side, which is the payments to contractors were based on receipt of appropriate documentation, internal reviews and approvals.
Yes.
Meaning contractor may present it, but I don't know what Quan got to pay the, if you got a one-page summary, is that
enough information to.
Is that appropriate or not?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Change orders, I think you've talked about. I put in here, this is where it gets maybe a little muddy. And maybe you use the word value engineering. So when I read this, I say change orders are executed for items deemed necessary or that provided a long-term cost benefit.
That's absolutely what value engineering.
Okay, right. Number 5 is the Prop-L master budget changes were presented and approved by the building committee and board. I believe we're aware that didn't happen. So I don't know that that should be part of the procedures, at least, those documents were not presented.
Sure.
Okay. Number 6 is the branch and words package specific budget changes are presented. Again, same thing. That'll be a communication contractor. And then the last one, number 7, is expenditures for non-construction related costs. Follow a defined internal process for receipt payment and were properly identified to a branch or physical facility. That really gets to the internal side. I guess my question is, do we want that under this project or not? This gets into the IT things and furniture and other things.
No.
Probably not.
No.
Okay, so Michelle, any objection to that?
No.
All right, so we'll just scratch that one. Okay, so on a broad basis, and again, the overall objective I have at the top here was to provide a form of assurance to the board and the public that funds approved for Prop-L capital improvements were appropriately used for the purposes intended. So maybe we'll address that other one in another fashion. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, when I read over this, I had for points 3, 4, and 7, and we're deleting the portion for number 7 there. I'd like to know in particular what offices or departments within the sender of an invoice or billing. I like to identify them, and then in particular, once they arrive here at the library, what office is involved between receipt of the invoice and the actual disbursement of a money transfer or a check. And then if I could just ask a general question, I guess you're a construction person also, besides an accountant or whatever. Okay. And these are admittedly somewhat naive questions, so please bear with me. In preparing a guaranteed maximum price, I'm assuming that the contractors, first of all, build in a profit margin. They have to pay their bills.
Okay.
Also, within the determination of cost for material and labor, I'm assuming that they would anticipate, like you mentioned, COVID and inflation. So I'm assuming that they would anticipate cost escalation or inflation in preparing the GMP.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the contingency portion is.
Okay, but aside from the contingency, I'm assuming that they would try to come up with good numbers anticipated to be in the future for steel. Is that safe to assume?
It's safe to assume under natural circumstances. I don't think you could go through and hold a contractor accountable for.
Well, but okay, not with the contractor, but if it's in a contract.
Sure.
Okay, so if they prepare in good faith a projection for the cost of a project, they take a risk on assuming that the projections are correct. And if they feel they're a little bit squishy, there could be tariffs or whatever, then of course they would increase that. Am I safe to assume so far?
I'm tracking.
Okay.
Yep.
Then my thought would be at that point, they have built in from their perspective and their superior knowledge, the potential for cost differences. And then they submit a contract and they say, there's risk involved. If we somehow have to face cost increases for material or labor, whatever, we're going to absorb that. That's safe to assume so far.
Yes.
Okay, but then I would say that that's very attractive to the customer. But then when it comes down to it, the other shoe to drop, saying, oh, by the way, just in case we didn't do that, we submitted this guaranteed price with the assumption of assuming risk. But by the way, we're going to eliminate the risk by throwing in a contingency. So that's safe to assume.
Yes.
So then what the hell was the benefit of getting GM these guaranteed prices?
That's kind of my view as well.
I think that you're building in a certain amount of risk within the project to create expediency, and the pieces that would be normally and understandable given historical trends and costs. And interesting piece of the project would be to look at if we had all the information that we have today and we looked at that in December of 19 versus June of 2020. What was the difference and what communications were happening at that point in delivering and providing the agreed upon contract, and what language was in there from a force majeure, act of God, sure, that would not have contemplated that risk.
Okay, clearly, if we have impossibility of performance, like we had bedrock just below the roots for the grass, of course. But I don't think we faced anything like that. I think with the exception of some water systems up at North Oak, it seemed to be everything that was proposed was based upon numbers determined and known by the contractor with safe assumptions, and they have superior knowledge, and they, I assume, could estimate cost escalations. They have access to, I guess, international markets for steel, for example. So I'm saying this one unartfully, but and just reflecting on the notion of a contingency, the scope that they are, I would have assumed that they should have been baked into the cost determinations of all the elements that went into the final proposal.
Sure. But then I understand where you're coming from and understand the question. It makes sense, and I would, phase 2 of this will get into that and understanding the bids and the value engineering and saying, okay, this is what the bid was. Was it reasonable or was it not reasonable? And why is it 20% over that?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to not give you a non-answer.
No, that's okay. But my point is that we have, if we representing the taxpayers and the voters and the users of the library, receive an offer presented in good faith and said, this is the maximum we're going to charge, but if the costs go up, we're going to eat it. I'm not saying it's disingenuous, but it just seems that the whole benefit of having a guaranteed price just flies right out the window. Again, that's an emotional response. How many?
Yeah.
Well, I have to look at the contracts.
Yeah.
Of course.
And that's kind of where I was, is that this is a contractual issue. If Dunn has subcontracts that say we're going to charge you X, and that's the price, right? And it gets back to who controls the contingency. And if we don't make any changes, then the contingency is under the control of the library, is the project, what I'll call the project manager. Right? So again, to use Riverside as the bad example, but I have 600,000 of contingency, and that is the library's decision as to whether that gets used, as long as the contract says that's the case.
Right.
And I think we're on the same page, but I think it's going to be a findings issue, correct?
Yeah.
You don't have.
No,
without looking
I don't
over
need to look
details,
over
you don't know.
context to understand that would be one of the findings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so any other questions?
Maybe, I think for the benefit of everyone in the room, if you could kind of give us examples of what change orders really mean, like when they occur on a project, what do they typically cover? My reason for asking this question is, we've all heard the phrase, there's the map, and then there's the terrain. And I have very limited experience here, but it's my understanding that change orders are quite common for a variety of reasons. That outside of material costs and these sort of things.
Yeah, but to that metaphor, I would assume that before we get the bid, they just don't look at the map, they actually walk the terrain. Okay, well, then they're in the superior position to know what they'll be facing, and they should be into the bid.
Yeah, no, and so a change order is within the assumptions that they created of the bid, knowing that there could be price escalations. It's going through and saying, okay, our original bid, including contingency, is different, and we need approval for that. That is from a hard bid, here's what I'm going to provide you for X amount, and that's my total cost to, hey, we're going to add, change, create a different, design, move a wall that wasn't initially planned for. Those are types of things that the construction team at the library had opinions and weighed in on and understood the cost of that change. And some of those might have fallen in the contingency where it is red versus blue, same carbon. But go ahead.
We're on the same page, okay? I think that's what this phase 2 has to deal with. Because if you remember from what I presented in February, if you go back and look at the contractor budgets and the side notes on some of those where, well, we save money here, so we're going to move it down to here. I think that has to get covered in this process. We don't know the answer. And that's, so there were savings that were, I think, and I'm I don't have, I'm just going off what was there, but it appeared that there were savings taken off one project and moved to a different project. Could have been. I don't know. I don't know for a fact. I just know the numbers were based on the comments. It appears.
Sure. There was
cost
very
removed.
clearly annotation of some of the projects where there was a delivered savings. Now, where those savings got reallocated or not, I don't have the.
Yeah, that was part of your project here.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I just heard him say in a perfect world, and I'm like, I've yet to live a day in that world. So
Well,
I just want to make sure.
but I agree, but that's the architect's job, I mean, if we're sending this out for bid, it's, if we're going to do that differently, we should have done a design, what is it, a design? No, design build. It's where you do the drawings after you're done. Okay, or whatever it's called, because I've done this.
Yeah.
And then you say, this is how much it costs, right? That's not what we did. We had the architect drew very specific plans. We bid those plans. We were supposed to build that plan. And if we build it, then the contingency, and assuming that there were no changes required, then the cost should have been the guaranteed maximum without the contingency built in. Is that?
Fair to say.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Before we exit this, so construction began on these projects when?
The first approval was May 18th, 2018. That was the first, those were the first two work packages.
And I haven't gone back to this. So I'm going back to these tariffs because another political subdivision, we got caught in the middle of it. So, and if you don't have it now, that's fine, but I certainly will look for it. When did the steel tariffs, when were they imposed? If you don't know, And then the Doug fir from Canada. I assume we have wood somewhere in these buildings.
Assuming so.
Yeah, so that would be an interesting part on it, because those were changed, does have to be change orders that were somewhere published, because
Right, and we clearly identified the difference in change orders of change in, hey, we're moving a wall versus, hey, the price of this material that we quoted is escalated. We call those out specifically in the agreed upon procedures of when did those happen and why and how was it communicated.
And Bob, to your question, again, we didn't ask Andy to get into that far into it. If the contract puts the risk on the contractor, it doesn't, in my view, I don't, it's good information to know, but it should not have had any impact. It should have no impact in causing additional cost unless the contract says the library has to take that risk.
that's what
So I
remember
think
time
let's
and-
leave that into the phase two.
so that's in phase two.
Those are the kind of things that will be come out of this project. Yeah, so this is strictly the scoping side.
I just wanted to assume that we had construction in that time frame when tariffs were
Okay.
being used in the construction.
All right, let's go to section 4, which is the schedule, which is pretty aggressive here. And it calls for sending this out for responses with notifications, really what I'll call a 30-day time frame. Is that normal? Okay with that? And then it goes through the interview process, which is, again, looks fairly aggressive. Let's say we would have this done by the end of June. This would not be presented until, well, oh gosh. I thought you have, of course, sort of a two-step process in here for selection. One is you're looking at the initial responses and the qualifications, maybe some, introductory interviews, and then weeding out those that we, don't deem as options, and then getting down to what I'll call the final group of candidates. Okay. So the interviews, that's really where the critical interviews are done. Correct? Okay. So who should be involved in that?
Are you directing that question to me?
I'm putting it out to the committee and people around here. Who should be involved in these interviews?
Certainly staff.
So that, I mean, obviously you,
Yes.
Quan, anyone else from staff?
No, I think that would be good.
Okay. I'm assuming I would have to sit in. I would want at least one, if not two other people to sit in on these. They're probably done on Zoom.
Yeah,
Volunteers?
I'd be glad to.
I know that I do not have time. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Bob? Yummy.
What is the can you tell, like, sort of what's the the time commitment for these?
I would guess usually they would last no more, well, they will last no more than an hour each. Might even be less. But by the time you do introductions and just having gone through this with the disbursement review, it's right. We spend about an hour each, Quan.
Yes.
With those. So by the time you answer questions and go through the backgrounds and get an understanding, it's at least an hour. And I would guess, again, I don't know how many people will respond or how many candidates will end up in the final mode. I'm hopefully at least 3 or 4. So you're looking at, a 4-hour commitment, and then the time after that to have discussions about, what gets presented. So that's the commitment.
Yeah.
And
I think
honestly, it
that's
doesn't have to be limited. I'm saying I would like a minimum number of people, but it doesn't mean we restrict anybody. So if there's 4 from the committee that do it, and if there's 6 of us, that'd be even better yet. So,
Yeah, I think I'd like to do it.
okay.
Yeah, so for staff, we're proposing Aaron and Quan and maybe somebody from the facilities side of it or. That's
I'll work on that.
okay.
Okay, so then the committee will be involved. All right, great. The other piece then is and I don't know that we have to decide this today. But we talked about on section 7 is the evaluation and selection criteria or just waiting. I think mechanics are useful, but they also can be impediments. And I think the one piece that I've mentioned is that, it's possible that you could end up with 2 different firms doing different pieces, depending on the expertise that's presented to us.
Yeah, I had a question. In the 3rd paragraph here on the 7, you talk about a 40% wait for qualifications. Would you be providing like a grid so we would determine the other 60%?
We can come up with a evaluation methodology.
Okay, is that typical?
And the weighting percentage, it's how you guys would like to see that. It could be an equal weighting towards all the factors. The biggest criteria for us, and what we wanted to highlight in understanding the qualifications is what's the sampling methodology that a firm is going to use related to the quotation, because that's where time and library dollars are going to be spent. Do we sample 100 invoices or 1,000? And if those 100 give us issues or errors, how does it extrapolate, and how do we handle any issues or errors from that? So from a methodology standpoint in sampling, it's going to be really important, given the budget within this review. And so from a weighting standpoint, I put that in there. It's been in documentation past of the library, and so left it. But it's
hard. Well, we can,
absolutely.
I think it's good to come up with a grid, so. Quan, you have any questions?
Well, if I may, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
One is, because of the capital project is still going on, do we need to have a cutoff date for the capital plan review? Second question I have is, the deadlines for the RFP mentioned about the interview and the selection by the end of June.
If that's not reasonable, we can absolutely change it.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I just say, once we select a firm, should we give them a deadline to complete their work?
I think that's love the idea, but once you get into the work and understand the issues and the opportunities for reviewing that work, I don't know if it was me, I would want to have a schedule that would allow us to have some flexibility with understanding communication of, here's what we ran into, this is why it's going longer, or hey, this is going a lot more smoothly than we anticipated, so we're going to deliver results early. I don't think it's reasonable to say you have to be done by X date.
Okay.
I guess knowing, once we get past the budget, and that there's probably, I'm assuming a little more flexibility, that this will push into the fall, but be done by November 30th, ideally, somewhere, right?
I mean, it's fine. I'm just saying, as part of the RFQ, shall we give a deadline for the completion? Or at least a tentative,
I'm okay putting out a time, kind of a general timeline.
Yeah,
Without-
I think that's reasonable, understanding that there are assumptions that you would make based off of the number of change orders, number of invoices, and what would be covered or reviewed in those procedures that would create additional work.
Yeah, and just to, and again, this, so go back to the initial discussion in September, it was a potential for, this is the first phase, meaning scoping. The second phase is to actually do the review work. And then if we run into issues and problems or things that have to be fully further investigated, that may be a phase 3.
Potentially.
Right, potential phase 3, right?
Yeah.
So, but the idea is to get the phase 2 done and say, here's all the findings we have now, what do you do? Sure. So I think that to have some sort of a time frame identified, that would be fine. I would prefer that because I don't want this hanging out for a year.
Yeah, completely reasonable.
Yeah. Okay.
the last question I have is, for you to prepare this document, we provide some additional information to you. For anyone to bid on this RFQ, shall we attach some kind of documents for them to understand the scope of the work? If so, shall we specify that in the RFQ?
I believe in the RFQ, there are certain numbers that need to be completed. I don't have the full range of how many change orders or how many invoices that I highlighted in there. To give responders the full breadth of the population that they might be reviewing. And that will give them, there's very standard audit methodologies or review methodologies as it relates to sampling. In the number that you review on 1,000 invoices versus 200 invoices and what the dollar amounts are around will help them understand what their initial review would look like from a methodology standpoint. I think that for the context of responding to this RFQ, I think that's the necessary information versus the detail of the information that you provided to us to create it.
Just if I can chime in, at this point, I think the library takes this document over. We do the document. And your work is pretty much done in terms of defining the procedures and fill in the blanks and clean it up and do whatever. But I'm assuming that we would allow them to see the same documents that you have.
Sure.
So they can see what they look like.
Mhm.
And I would want to do that. So they know what they're, what they're getting into.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's kind of where does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. All right, so. All right. Well, I think we beat this. Any other questions? Well done. Thank you. Michelle, or Yami, any last comments or questions?
No, not here.
Thank you.
No,
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
You can imagine that. Okay, the next item on the agenda is we don't need okay. Is the budget. And you have first question is who's looked at this in detail?
I have.
Michelle or Yummy, have you had a chance? If not, I'm asking only because it'll help me and Aaron walk through this thing, so we're using the time wisely. I want to be out of here before 3.
Yeah, I
How much
did-
is this
looked it
different
over.
than a month ago or
Well,
whatever?
there's just more information. So that's the purpose here is to just walk through. The top level has not changed materially, if at all, but we have more information in terms of how things are being spent. What's going on underneath. This is information that historically was not presented to the board. It was strictly summary information only. So I'd like to walk through these things just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if there are questions, we'll answer those. And, move through it. This is what I want I would like Finance Committee to understand the budget in detail. And to, so that when we get into the next year of looking at results, we know what's going on and there are no surprises. And if there are surprises, then we'll deal with them at the time. So I think what's been laid out is very helpful and gets us off to a good start here. So the first page, we do this or you want me to?
Actually, Quan, I think, is probably the best person to walk us through it if you like.
Yeah, okay. On the screen, that's the summary of budget for all the funds the library has. The first column is the operating fund, general fund. The second one is the capital project fund. And we also have a special, so-called special revenue funds. That includes gift, grant, debt service, scholarship, community foundation fund. And we also have a permanent fund, which is the endowment fund. The last column I put outside the total budget is the health insurance fund, because it's a special service fund. You had the expenditure side has some duplication with the general fund. So usually that's outside of the total budget, but we present it for your consideration. That summary page, fine, yes.
So Quan, one of the questions I've had, and I guess, again, this gets into the accounting versus just what I'll call government accounting versus management accounting. And from a management standpoint, it would be helpful, at least in my view, and if I could go back and restart the clock, would have been to have what I would call a Prop L fund. Okay, so when work packages were approved, that there was an accounting of that, said here's what the approved expenditures are, and then those funds would have been allocated out of the capital fund. Okay.
Yes.
So they're in, and then those eventually wind down. And if I have a Prop L, then I get to a wind down phase where it's done and I have no more money going into it. But the way we have this structured now is we're mixing in the balance or the remainder of Prop L with what we coined last year as a maintenance reserve fund. I guess my question is, should from an accounting standpoint, can we have both funds? Can we have what I'll call the capital fund, which are one-time projects, build them, rehab, whatever the case may be done, versus a maintenance fund that says those are the ongoing things, and that's the reserve we have to manage for long-term maintenance costs.
Yeah, we can have a sub-fund inside a capital project fund to account for maintenance and a capital plan, the proper L.
I mean, can we present them separately?
Yeah, each can have its own sum fund balance.
Okay, so, because as an example up here, you have, just to pick on a number here, you have the transfers in and out, because the 350 out of the 9,350,000 is the current budgeted allocation for the maintenance fund, whereas
Yes,
$9 million is for the capital, for the Propel expenditures.
Yeah.
Because I think it'd be helpful, just as I said, to keep that separate, so that at some point we're going to be done. In the next 24 months, Propel is going to be done and closed.
yeah. And because this is a summary and the detailed budget book, we will have a page to specify those
Okay.
purpose for each one of them.
Okay, all right. Okay, so go ahead.
That at the top, first of all, that's the beginning fund balance for each one of them.
Ron,
Yes,
I think we could, since we've already reviewed this, maybe we could switch over to just your revenue projections, and we can look at account detail.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the operating fund.
okay.
The operating.
Yeah, that's fine. We can start with tax revenue.
That would be good. Good idea. So
For tax revenue,
can we flip the page, Cody?
yeah, that's under the tax.
I'm going to get back to which page.
Yeah,
It's-
that's the one. Okay. Regardless how much increase we will see on reassessment, I believe we can only get the maximum amount of increase, which is 5% on the current year's tax revenue, plus any new construction and a new personal property tax. So we projected 2023 tax revenue to be $64.1 million. Also, we have to pay a commission to each county. And some taxpayers may dispute with their tax bills. So the collection rate was estimated at 93% for next year. Each year, we will also receive some delinquent tax from past years and a replacement tax plus some pilots. So the tax revenue, the total amount of tax revenue is $64.5 million. That's about $3.1 million increase. Also, I compared the current year's estimate versus the budget and versus the levy projection we did in September last year. The difference is less than 0.5%. So, which means the current year revenue, tax revenue will be very close to the budget and to the levy projection. For next year, the average increase, a combination of new tax and delinquent tax, is about 5.1% increase.
Juan, do you have the data for the different components of the taxes? Because what we built in the levy projection were the assessed value or the assessed values for each county. We got down, at a top level basis, but do you have a comparison of what the projection was versus what the actual receipt is?
Yeah.
Both. Can you prepare that, and we have that ready for Tuesday or for the board meeting?
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, because
Okay.
and send that out to us. Send that out because I think it's helpful. It'll be helpful to the committee, and I know some of you maybe gets in the weeds, but this is. I think we have to go back and test the levy projection we did to see how good our assumptions were, and that becomes the basis for how we move forward as well. So You know, and if we're within 0.5% of what we projected, then obviously, you know, your numbers were pretty rock solid. Which is what, you know, that's the idea is we're not getting thrown curveballs between levy projection and what actually comes in. So if you can have that prepared, I would like to see that and down at the detail, because then that would be useful going forward as well.
ETR is the types of tax.
Correct. Yeah, as well as and I'm assuming the collection room, when you say collection rate, I know that the collectors take their cut. It's either 1 or 1.5%, but they're also some of the taxes come in through different channels, like the state, what I call the statewide levy.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay, question. So you say the difference was what, 0.5 or point?
Below 0.5% of the projection.
And so last year, what was that in terms of dollars?
Take a quick look. For example, the budget is $61.29 million for current year. We believe we will receive $61.4 million, which is about close to $200,000 more. And the levy projection at that time was $61.6 million.
And
That's a $200,000.
so so we projected 94% collection rate. What's your actual?
That's the 94, that's based on 94%.
Is based on
90 collection rate.
So it could be higher.
Yes.
Because again, if people, you know, contest the tax numbers, then that's going to come in through either they don't pay or they contest them. We don't uncontested.
They can either not to pay or pay under the protest.
And we
if
don't
it's
collect
paid-
that until it's clear. Is that correct?
90 days or settled.
Okay. All right. So it's more than just. Let's say I would like to understand the different. There are more. There's more than one assumption in the process of setting the revenue estimate. I just want to make sure we understand all the pieces.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's the tax revenue.
What page, Cody?
There is a next tab is the operating revenue. Before that, it has some other revenues.
It's not it.
The
I
other
should say operating fund 01. If you're looking at
tab is called operating.
there it was right there.
Yeah,
Great.
okay.
Could you increase the size of that a little bit?
Okay. Next to the tax revenue, we receive some governmental grants like an E-rate, state aid, and an A&E tax. This is close to the current year's budget. We believe we will get about $880,000 for that. Contribution and private grants, we don't record much in operating fund. Some of them will go to the gift and the grant fund. But we still have some small, sometimes we get a small amount we recorded for general purpose. We have $5,000 there. Fines and fees, the book fine fees are very consistent. We believe will be a little below $500,000, budgeted at $480,000. Printing and copying, those are based on the historical numbers. Add them up, we will get about a little over $606,000 for fines and fees. The next category, I call them other service charges. Some of them are new service charges. And there, that's a list of those services, like a room rental, coronary center. Coronary center will be a combination of existing grants and a new service revenue. If it's existing grant, we may request a fund transfer from gift and grant fund to operating fund.
Quan, how does the culinary center match up to what the projections were? Is that's a very precise number? Is that off something else? You have everything else rounded to the 1,000, which I think is how I do projections, but this seems to be very precise.
I could go back and look at it, but that is an estimate, but that's less than what was originally projected because much of the cost for the Culinary Center is offset with scholarship funds. Diana, so opening day, June, well, someday in June, soon. Cost of use will be drastically offset because of Kauffman Foundation funding. That's why revenues are a little lower than projected.
Say that again, the cost of use.
Sure, we're issuing scholarships based on a grant that we received, I forget which year. So the initial cost of use is offset with grant funds.
Our cost.
The user's cost, the cost that we would be billing for. Which fits perfectly within the terms of the grant.
Okay.
And
it's $36,000 that the Kauffman Foundation has gifted for scholarships for new incubator plants.
so why that's 30, what is it? 77,329. I can speak to them, but again, it's you add 36 on top of it. I think that was their original projection for the year. Thank you, Diane.
Okay.
The passport service is the next biggest service revenue. You have see a lot of increase month over month. So the total amount is $275,700. That also not included in the operating revenue, but it's still part of the revenue is the investment income and possible short-term borrowing costs. We estimated the borrowing cost will be $250,000 for up to $10 million. And we also believe that cost will be offset significantly by the interest income of the year. Questions about the revenue?
So investment income looks low.
Well, I mean,
I'm okay with that.
I'm
Let's finish that. We'll come back.
admittedly, I'm conservative and the message that I've given to staff is to provide us with conservative estimates.
Okay. Well, let's finish and then I think we'll come back to that. So, okay.
So that's on the revenue side. If you can change back to the operating budget, the title called operating budget. Yeah. That page shows 2 years history plus the budget of current year and the budget of next year. So
Quan, just clarify, the tax revenues here are net of the debt service allocation,
Yes.
correct?
yes.
Just make sure everybody gets that.
So for revenue, operating revenue, that's about $3.3 million increase over current year's estimate. And
Yeah, Unless there's an objection, there are some pages that are attached in the expenses.
I mean, the account summary.
Well, yeah, I mean, there really hasn't been much change, is correct?
Oh,
Okay, so there is a account details tab. Yikes.
Account details, yeah.
That shows budget to budget. I would. When we move forward, I'd like to see actuals on here, or at least what prior actual and then the projection for the current year. But I went through this earlier. I don't know if anybody else has had a chance to go through the detail. All right, where's my notes? So I didn't have a lot of questions. I did highlight a couple things though. So, but I'll let you, Quan, do you want to get, again, this is comparing budget to budget. I think it's more helpful to have actuals in here, but go ahead.
Under the previous tab, I had a budget was, the actual versus the new year's budget. But for these account details, I only listed the current year's budget and the next year's budget because the account details includes a lot of budget requests, not just budget account, more detailed than budget account. And in the past, including current year, we have not tracking those budget requests. But starting next year, we are planning to track those budget requests. So we will be able to provide the comparison between each year's budget request.
Okay.
And for the on the budget account detail, it starts with library materials, payroll and the personnel budget was presented in April. All details were covered. And for library materials, I would like to highlight a one-time spending for East Independence. That's $100,000. That's included in the next year's budget. And also there's another change is the top line, the book budget. The book budget includes the ebooks. So this is also library material and material processing and the licensing, that's higher than current year's budget because we moved about $70,000 previously and accounted in a different budget line. Moved to there.
So Quan,
Yeah.
I noticed that on, I think, one other place. Where was, when you say you moved 70,000, where was that? Or where is it?
It was recorded under 5380 supplies account. And right now it's under
Oh, okay.
material.
Is that the 74,000?
That's a 69,550. That's
I'm looking at,
the first one, the note. I'm sorry, that's there. Right now. So that line,
no, I know, but I'm looking down in
Yeah.
supplies.
Gordon. Yeah, it just got moved up and they lowered their request to, it's not $74,000 anymore, it's like 67. They cut their request for supplies. So it just got moved from one line to the next. Because if you,
No, I get that. The only thing I would, it would be helpful, I think, if we took that line and moved it up here underneath. Even though I know it's in a different, so I get sort of apples to apples, or at least see the numbers instead of, because I think the same thing happened on mileage, where you have a note where I see on, this is
yeah.
on page 2, where your travel mileage goes from 45,000 to 85,000. But down here, you have 45,000 in a travel expense. So I'm really comparing, I should be comparing 90,000 to 85,000. It looks like I'm comparing 45 to 85.
I can make a two lines there. One is the
But just
new
move it,
addition,
yeah.
the other one is the.
Yeah, just move the current year budget up to where you have it classified for the current year, for next year, sorry.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm wandering around the page.
Next group is the programming budget. Top two lines is the total amount is 536,100. That's for adult and youth programs.
Information and reader services, both people can be adult. It's top
Okay,
three lines.
of top three, yeah, okay. So that's 736,100. I'm sorry, that's still on the same.
Yeah, no, that's there.
Cody, we're still on the account detail.
CNC library programs. Yeah,
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
The top three is for adult and youth programs. The total amount is 736,100. Last year, that's about $869,000. And I also made a list of those so-called mission enhanced programs. We have Square One Story Center events, Culinary Center. As you remember, the revenue for Culinary Center was projected to be $70,000. The expenses here is a little over $80,000. And the re-rocket is $28,500. The last one, we have currently we have a $20,000 budget for genealogy programming, and we are going to use community foundation funds to support genealogy programming. So that is a new, we created this new library programming category in the operating fund.
And if you're craving even more detail, there's two additional tabs which break out materials and programs. The reason why we did this is to demonstrate this is shaping up to be an underfunded area of library services. So we can kind of see how it breaks out in terms of number of programs and in a very general sense, number of people served. So if you care to look at those details, they're on the materials and programs.
Gotcha.
The next group is the leased space. We have two. One is long-term lease for Redbridge. We have a contracted base lease plus common area maintenance fee, tax, and insurance. The second one is a short-term lease for Green Valley branch. I only have 3 months budget there based on the current agreement. Next group, we have
And not to cut you off, but not so so we get out of here at a reasonable time. We don't need to go through every line.
okay.
So I think maybe look at the group if there's any specific things to highlight or any questions anyone has, then we'll skip to the next one. How's that?
I have just a very unrelated question for Jennifer. You have now gone to semi-monthly payments payroll.
Not yet, but we're working on it. The project is happening.
That's fantastic.
We're hoping
Good.
shooting for July, so that's
Great.
great. Fingers crossed.
Congratulations. That's good.
I can start with some big ones, like technology and other. If
There was one of my questions, but you've answered it. Has that been in the works for a while?
We've talked about it for a while. We're it's kind of
Years or
paying
just-
once a month. And it's really difficult for folks when they first start, because we started paying in arrears in 2014. So if they start on the 15th of the month, they don't see a paycheck until for 6 weeks. That's a while.
That's a lot.
So, so we're working on that semi.
But hourly is always going to be in arrears.
It's always going to be what?
Hourly, now are you paying hourly people?
Everybody's in arrears now. We pay everyone in arrears.
Okay, but you're not paying hourly as though they're going to work for the week. You're
No.
paying what actually gets turned in. And so you have a week, at least a week's lag
Correct.
or more.
Yeah, right now we have to, and we will continue to have to.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
so the reason for that decision is I suffered for 6 weeks without pay. No, but I came onto the job and this process, I experienced once before when I worked in the Middle East. Those have done a little bit differently there. A man would walk around to your desk and hand you this big wad of cash once a month.
I like that.
But with the idea of recruiting talent and hiring a diverse workforce, it seems like a 6-week wait to get pay kind of removes candidates out of the pool. So we decided to turn the trigger on.
That's fine. Please fine with me. This is a comment I made last meeting or after last meeting, and both Quan, we discussed it as well. We have what I call capital items in here. And the expenses, and I understand why you're doing that, but in the, what I'll call the maintenance plan or the capital funding plan, all those assets need to be in that plan, even though we expense them. Okay, does that make sense? So when you buy a vehicle and you have new vehicles in there somewhere, that gets expensed, but we still need an asset schedule that says that's a whatever life, 4-year life, 5-year life, or unless we drive them until they're dead. But I don't, it's kind of like PCs and laptops, whatever. What sort of replacement cycle are we on?
We don't, we run them as long as we can get out of them.
So I'm just going to throw out a number and say every 5 years, we're going to, because you can get 5 years out of a desktop now.
We're gonna get 7 or 8 out of the one.
Well, but if I build my maintenance plan that says, every 5 years I'm going to spend X amount, then as opposed to spending $2 million every 5 years, I get that on a schedule to where I don't have to allocate 2 million. I'm allocating 200,000 or 300,000, and I have, I'm recycling those or cycling those out on a normal basis, but I still have to have them tracked other than in the operating expenses, because once they go into expense, I never see anything. Do you have a schedule on all that?
We keep track of them in an inventory database, so we can keep track of them.
But you don't have a projected, like a 10-year, because a lot of stuff you're doing right now is replacing, or like, what was the, I want to say like a sonic wall where your software support runs out and you have to buy the new one, right?
Yeah.
So, typical 5-year life cycle on that.
Most of those we sign like a contract for it or something like that, so it has like a software license that has that kind of. life cycle.
But again, I'm just talking about managing the forward costs so we know that something has to be funded. And as opposed to just saying, oops, we have to spend that this year and we didn't know about it. We actually know about it and can plan for it in the funding cycle. Ron, do you have any other questions on these things? Or Bob, I really don't have And those are my questions. On expenses anyway.
Let me just say on that. I think I'm supposed to be more in a policy position in this capacity. And going through detail after detail is not what I signed up for, nor do I think it's functional for a member of the Board of Trustees to do this. The chair, I get it, because when I was chairing this, I spent much more time. I think if you want to talk about major policies like how we're paying people, that's legitimate. But really, I looked at this the other day over the weekend, some of it, it's just, I don't really care about some of these minimal things. I'm not going to sit here and add them all up, get to a cumulative value of $300 or whatever it's going to be, 300,000. I don't know, but we're spending a lot more time on this, and I think the trustees ought to be dealing with a meeting like this.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to talk about where the taxes are coming from? That's fine. You want to talk about that? Yeah, that's fine. But really, this is.
Well, Bob, part of the reason for this is one, we've never seen this level of information.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to understand it. Okay. And I think part of the policy is understanding where the money goes. And part of the responsibility of the finance committee is putting together the budget. And if we're going to present a budget to the board that we think is think is appropriate, and the management and the staff have done their job, then I think it's our responsibility to go through at least some level of detail, as opposed to being handed a number. And I'm going to pick on technology last year just because nothing. It's not to pick on Brian, but in last year's budget was proposed a $2.7 million budget for, I don't know what it was, electronic subscriptions or whatever. Okay. In the budget presentation to the committee was a link to the board site or to the website. It basically said, if you want to know what's in the budget, go look on the website. That isn't helpful to me. Okay. This is helpful to me because now I have some confidence that staff is actually looking at the details, that Aaron has his arms around this thing, and I know where the money's going. Okay. So I don't have to sit here every month and say what's happening and why. So this is once a year, and I'm sorry if it takes extra time, but I think this is the job of the finance committee. So there's nothing that says you have to look at it in detail. I did. I would like to, as I said, I think we have to understand. I know you want to talk about revenue, but talking about the total revenue doesn't solve it. I have to know every assumption that was made in the levy calculation, all the way from the assessed values and all the components of those values to the collection rate, to the collector fees, to the state driven numbers, to the back taxes, how they were paid, what the duration, what the delinquency rate is. Those are all part of revenue. So you want to see that. I want to see the expense detail. Okay. I actually want to see it all.
Well, I think as chair, you need to, because I'm.
But it shouldn't be my responsibility as a chair.
Snow, pest control. Really? Is that necessary today to talk about?
As I said, the responsibility of the finance committee is to bring together a budget. Last year, the budget for utilities was, I don't know what again, we're trying to establish a level of confidence that we can tell the board that we're comfortable with this budget and we're recommending they approve it. I'm not going to do that without going through the detail.
Well, I guess the difference here is what I think is relevant in detail. And like I said, I don't know if lawn care is a big deal to the world, but if you think we want to take this time and.
I didn't say we're going through every line. I said, let's go through the sections. If there's anything significant, then we'll talk about it. If there's not. So do you have any other questions? Because I don't.
No.
Well, I appreciate it being available, Gordon, to look at, especially sort of where we are with the budget the last year or so. Anyway, I appreciate it. I don't think it was what we've done today has been unnecessarily taxing, at least on me. So anyway, that's just my opinion. I'm comfortable with the level of detail. So
Michelle, I think she had to drop off.
I'm
She's-
back.
Oh, you
No,
are?
I
Oh,
don't have any questions.
okay.
Let me just say that I don't mind this being available, but for us in a public meeting to go through line by line is probably a little extreme. I know you say we're not going to do that, but hope that's the case.
Ron?
I just want to confirm that although this is presented on the hybrid cash basis, like Brian mentioned, there are continuing property schedules for the dates of acquisition on properties and anticipated life and when they have to be abandoned or replaced.
So normally like PCs and things like that don't really have like an end of life, like the operating system might, other software might, it's kind of upgrade as you go, but the PCs are kind of how long can you get out of them? And like the power center that we have in there for this next year, that one, they just suddenly said, we're just not gonna support this anymore. And we had to make a choice as to whether to run or support it or not. And so there wasn't really a scheduled lifespan for that unit.
Sure, I probably shouldn't have used your example, but
That's okay.
for example, like vehicles and so forth. Again, we have continuing property schedules for the dates of acquisition, the mileage and the useful life of it, things like that, I'm assuming. So we can identify when replacement times are going to be arising.
Well, and again, my point is, and Aaron has this built in. That's part of his, if you look at the expenses. Where is it? Under professional fees, which is that second page. Go to the next page, Toby.
Bottom of the page, the other page.
You need to scroll up.
Right
Okay,
there,
where is it?
the bottom of the box.
Oh, under professional fees, Aaron has two different things built in. So we had talked about, and it's the last line, the capital maintenance. Well, actually, you have a couple of things in there. You have an ERP consultant, but you have a plan consultant for this built in for 80,000, which is to help build this, I think. Am I correct? To help build this, what I'll call the maintenance plan. And that's something we talked about. If you go back to last year, I'm sorry I have to repeat this, but I'm going to. Okay, so we were told that there was no maintenance that was going to be required until 2028. That wasn't quite the case. So the levy projection didn't build in a significant amount of dollars because everything was brand new. We don't need maintenance. So why would we be collecting taxes for something that's going to be 5 or 6 years down the road? And we would build up a reserve for when those maintenance things were needed. The 80,000 he has built in here is to get started on that. I think that's a reasonable number based on what I know, to get that kicked off to where we can build this sort of a schedule. Right. But if we didn't go through, Bob, if we didn't go through the detail, we wouldn't even know what's going on. So then how would I know if we're doing semi-monthly payroll without seeing it in here and what the cost is? So this is a once a year process. It's burdensome. I apologize, but I think this is the responsibility of the finance committee. So. Okay, the only other comment I have on the proposed budget, and the only concern I have is and this is on the operating budget, is that we're allocating only 350,000 for future maintenance. And I don't know if we can. I will tell you how we came up with that or what the logic is behind that.
I understand about not wanting to see line by line, but there's even more that's on the cutting room floor. So the budget that was originally proposed was much different than this, and we had to make some choices. And what we have here, I think, is a sensible budget, but it's extremely tight, and in my opinion, maybe unsustainable over the long run. And 350 is the amount that we have allocated. And I think that would cover us, through the next year. It's open to discussion. If we think that number should change, staff to go back and we could see what we could do. But as I said, it's an extremely tight budget, and that would probably affect, we would need to decide on where to make cuts. If our revenue projections are accurate, or maybe they're a little too conservative and more comes in, then we'll be in a better place.
Well, that's kind of my question about the revenue piece and looking at the components. But Quan, you have in the capital projects fund, you have 500,000 of other service charges. What is that?
That's the Woolies project. There was a possibility we can get a TIF money.
So where do you have investment interest income built in?
Not in the capital, because we don't know what the market value adjustment would be.
Well, but we have interest coming in on cash. We have coupon payments on the bonds come in. Okay. If our intent is not to sell those, and I understand we're not going to budget market value changes, but why do we not include the cash flow off the interest?
Usually it's the combination of both as the revenue line item, the net investment income.
So we will have cash flow coming in. So the question is, how much is that? And that's something
It's
that,
about $20,000 a month.
so about 240,000 is going to come in.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then on the operating fund, which we have both, you have everything in the operating fund is kept on a short-term basis, and you have the central bank, what I'll call the operating account, which they pay you close to a money market rate, correct?
Correct.
So assuming those average balances, I know you have 250 built in, but you just gave me $250,000. So is it safe to assume that I have 250 and at 250,000 and with current rates at 5%, that's a $5 million average balance?
Well, for next year.
And I'm ignoring I don't care, market value changes because the current plan, and that can change, that we're not going to liquidate those securities unless something presents itself that says, let's do that. Correct?
Correct. For next year, the biggest uncertainty is the cash flow. I don't know how much will be available for investment. I don't think we will have much between July and December. We may have a few, I believe we'll be below the average of the investment amount for next year.
Your cash flows, I don't have it in front of me, but if you build this month by month, I mean, if you're drawing down for 3 months, then I have 9 months of other cash flow, and I have pretty healthy cash flow from December through probably July and August. For about 8 months of the year, I have pretty healthy balance.
Not sure, because between December we will start to receive a tax revenue. But December we will pay a lot of bills because the delay.
So I hear you. So I would just, I know you want to be conservative. I would rather get that number up. And with, like I said, we can if 240,000 has come in and we want to show an offset for 240,000 on on return, so it comes out to zero, but at least I know I have that cash coming in. So,
Okay,
I mean, the cash is going to come in absent, the government defaulting, because they're all agency securities and treasury securities, right? So.
all right.
Okay,
Before are we concluding or are we moving on?
I don't know, there are other questions? Yami and Rochelle, any other questions?
Nope.
Nope.
Well, I would just like to thank my beloved staff for all the hard work they've done on this budget and for joining us today. They were all begging me this morning, they said, can we sit in on finance? I said, absolutely. So thank you for taking this time out of your afternoon, your busy days. I really appreciate it. That's all I got.
I just like to share the sentiments for the effort that went into this.
Okay, I have, the only other business, do you want to talk about your construction? This will take a couple minutes, your construction management?
Oh. Well, yes, I mean, we've
We'll just
engaged.
call that another business, so.
Sure, I was going to introduce him to the full board. But anyway, the library has engaged an owner's rep to help us work through Riverside and East Independence. It's a duo, and they'll be visiting us on May 18th to do site visits, meet with the construction team and architects. And I'm very happy about that.
And the cost will be within the budget, because I don't, there's it in here somewhere.
It is within our budget. So, I mean, it's effective May 1st, so there's a portion that's covered under this year's expenses. And then there's
Okay,
the remainder in 20.
no, but is it in the project budget of the building, or is it in here?
It's in, we put it into capital, am I right?
Wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
That's,
yeah.
okay,
all right.
all right, super. No other business, then I'd ask for an adjournment, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Yummy, all right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hi.
Any opposed?